Okay, so thank you everybody for joining me here today. We will dive right in. So for super brief introduction, we've already gone over much of these things. If you have questions about any of these pieces, please do let me know. I will say that because of the approach that I take, I do typically blend quite a bit of community-held knowledge with the research-based knowledge, because while we are getting much, much better at including autistics and ADHDers and queer folks in research, there's definitely still a gap there that we're still needing to fill. So it's important that we learn from the knowledge that our community has held for all time. I will also build on the wonderful land acknowledgement from earlier, and I just want to acknowledge that, as it was mentioned, neurodivergent folks have always been on Turtle Island on North America. And it is so crucial to recognize that part of truth and reconciliation is carving out safe spaces for autistics and ADHDers, because we have valid and vital things to bring to the community. So I ask that in your own ways, you find space and time to not only connect with the land, but also to think about how you can make the spaces around yourself more inclusive for the autistic and ADHD folks in your environments. Super quick housekeeping. Research has limitations. Much of the research that is available does not often specify whether we're talking about female as in female assigned at birth versus female as in they're identifying you as a woman based on some assumption that they're making. So things like that often get missed in the research, but also there's something to be said for the fact that traditionally BIPOC communities and queer communities are definitely underrepresented in research. So if you see things that don't represent your lived history, please do still hold that dear. That is crucial because you know yourself best. And I'm so excited that we have so many folks here who are interested in gaining more knowledge and continuing to further the research on autism. I typically try to provide speaker notes and visual descriptions ahead of time. I also have chronic pain, and I'm in the midst of a pain flare, so I've not had time to type those beforehand. If those would be helpful for you for your own accessibility afterwards, feel free to shoot me an email, and I'm happy to provide them when I'm able to type those out. And then I'll be using identity first language rather than person first language that is based on my own preference as well as many in the community. So essentially using terms like autistic and ADHD'er rather than person with autism or person with ADHD. So we'll start off by going over some of the interactions between ADHD and autism, then we'll talk strategies, and then some resources that you can take to continue exploring this yourself. All right, so at a very, very, very basic level, ADHD broadly is the experience of having differences in regulating and directing your attention. I say differences because, as many of us ADHDers will know, and I'm sure there are many of us in the room here today, we can pay attention for an exceptional amount of time. It's just a question of whether it's on the thing that we're meant to be doing or not. I absolutely had intended to prep these slides far, 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 far in advance, but I knew I had slides I could adapt, so I did them the week beforehand. ADHD is just a thing you have to grapple with. Where does your attention go? On top of that, for many of us, we experience hyperactivity and or impulsivity. It's important to note that for many of us, especially adults, that hyperactivity can look different. It can be talkativeness, it can be wanting to constantly sit and crochet or have something that you're doing, or signing up for every single extracurricular at your high school. All of these things can be that hyperactivity showing up. And then on a basic level, autism is the experience of having differences with certain social interactions and communication. I say differences because there is research that supports the fact that autistics, we genuinely have really solid communication with other autistics and other folks who take the time to meet us in the middle. It's not that we have a deficit, it's that we, on both sides of the communication, have to meet each other in the middle to be able to understand more effectively. And then we often, as autistics, have a tendency towards self-regulation through repetition and routine. So, how do these things interact? Well, I will add the asterisk that all of these things are applicable to some, not all. Neurodiversity is a spectrum, so there's going to be certain things that you may experience and others that you may not. This is to contrast some of the common things that we might want to think about when we're trying to build strategies to support ourselves better and to support those in our lives better. So for ADHD, many of us crave novelty. We want newness. How do we then balance that and square that against if you're also autistic and you like familiarity, predictability? These things often sit on opposite sides of the spectrum. I will say also, we will get to the now what do we do with this info, don't worry. We also have, for the ADHD side of things, there's often challenges or differences in maintaining routines and habits. For many of us, we might fight for weeks, for months to build the most perfect routine, and then you get sick and you miss it, and now it's gone, and we have to rebuild it from scratch again. And that can be really distressing because it's hard to get that effort back out again. And on the other side, if you're autistic, many of us really like to have that consistency and routine, and that can cause a lot of distress if you need that, and it is hard to maintain for yourself. Another juxtaposition we have is there are differences in social communication and interactions for ADHDers, often because of things like we're thinking about the thing we'd like to say in the conversation and not necessarily processing what's being said to us. Or perhaps we are thinking about the thing that we have going on after this, not realizing that we've drifted into that. It can also be stuff like looking around the room, not because you are uncomfortable with eye contact, but you're just looking for extra stimulation. On the autistic side, for many of us, we have differences in intuitively understanding neurotypical social cues. I say intuitively because we can absolutely learn them. For many of us high maskers, we pick them up over time. But the question is if I plunked you into a brand new work environment where you knew none of the social protocol, would you be able to get that immediately, or would it take time to learn? The comparison I often give folks is it's like if you went to school and one day everybody was playing chess and there were no rule books and everybody knew how to play chess and nobody told you. So you spend the whole day trying to learn how to play chess. And then you come to school the next day and they're playing Monopoly and nobody tells you how to play Monopoly. And now you need to figure out Monopoly. For the next piece, differences, like I said previously, in regulating and directing attention. Whereas I would say on the autistic side, we're looking more so at differences in regulating and shifting attention. Because again, there can be that intensity of focus, but oftentimes it can feel more like there's that difficulty to pull yourself off of something that you're quite passionate about and drawn to. So there's a little bit of a subtlety there. And then I do also juxtapose fidgeting and stimming. Fidgeting tends to be more of a varied and spontaneous thing. For many of us, it can be a little more contained to a smaller space. Whereas for stimming, many of us like to use our full bodies or our voices. And there can be blending and mixing between these, especially if you are an AuDHD'er. Your brain doesn't exist in two halves of ADHD and autism. These are going to mix and blend together with each other. So, what are some of our similarities here? In terms of sensory processing, for many of us, we have differences in interoception, which is being aware of what your body needs. So think, for example, if you have sat down, you have hyper-focused on your crafting, and 12 hours later realized that you haven't eaten, gone to the bathroom, or moved. Not always helpful, but it's something that if we know about it, we can work with it and learn to support ourselves. Proprioception, this is where our body is in space. So for some of us, you may have seen what some people call the ADHD walk, where you're like zipping and zooming around stuff, leaning, and that can be really fun and great until you walk into 8 things over the course of your day and have bruises that you don't know where they came from. Much the same, many autistics have differences in coordination. Many folks have movement coordination disorder and other things that add to that difference in knowing where your body is. For many of us, we might sensory seek. So if we're looking to increase our stimulation, this can be familiar, friendly things. I am absolutely someone who loves my sour candies and my spicy things. However, there's also absolutely times that we might be avoiding stimulation because there's too much happening for our brains, so we need to decrease it. Things like, I also agree, the lighting here, fantastic. No harsh overhead lighting is beautiful. And then auditory processing. For many of us, there's differences in how language is processed. It's the kind of thing where, let's say, if someone is talking and you don't quite catch it, so you ask them to repeat themselves, but then 3 seconds later, you process it and you're able to answer the question again. But this can also be things too, like if you are trying to pair the auditory information with the physical cues that you're getting from somebody, that can slow down your auditory processing and make it harder to follow the conversation, especially in groups where we've got lots of information coming at you from multiple directions. Other similarities for social functioning. Many of us have neurodivergent communication styles. I like to describe it as we often have a tendency to speak in paragraphs versus sentences, because for many of us, we like to give the context around what's happening. Part of that can be because we're trying to give context so people don't prejudge or misunderstand us. But other times it can also come from that bottom-up thinking that many of us have, where we want to be able to lay out all of the details so that we're working from the same page and the same understanding, and we don't have to go back and fix something later. As well, differences in eye contact. Again, this can be from looking around the room, but it can also be because sometimes it's uncomfy to make eye contact. For many autistics, you might not realize it at first because you've got a little hack that you use, like staring at the person's brow bone or past them or things like that, but we find our ways to accommodate ourselves. There is rejection sensitive dysphoria, which in a very simplified form is a type of emotional dysregulation where we feel a heightened sensitivity to what we think is rejection. That could be feedback from somebody. That could also be, though, if we are being told that someone just doesn't want to do an activity with us, we might take that really intensely and feel like that person is withdrawing. And then the double empathy problem I alluded to previously, which is the idea that it's not an issue of neurodivergent folks being bad at communicating. This theory originated for autistics, though I would say it does translate quite well to ADHDers as well. And it's the idea that autistics and ADHDers, we tend to have a harder time understanding the thoughts of neurotypicals, and neurotypicals tend to have a harder time understanding us. One sec, sorry. I'm coming off of 2 weeks of being sick previously. Okay, so similarities in executive functioning. Actually, I'll go back for 2 seconds. I forgot my little chart here. This is a metaphor that was gifted to me by a client. And it's about the idea that for many of us, we feel more comfortable communicating with other neurodivergent folks because if you're talking to a person and you hand them a conversational cube, sometimes it's like a neurotypical gives you back a square. It's the same sort of shape, might be the same color, but it's flat. It doesn't have all the dimension and understanding. Whereas when we talk to other neurodivergent folks, they give you back a cube. It might be a different color, might be a different size, but there's still that depth there. For similarities in executive functioning. So for many of us, we have our hyperfocus and our special interests. There might be differences in time perception, where either every minute feels like an hour or it feels like we are like no time is passing whatsoever. We can have those differences in switching between tasks. Focus and attention can vary. Memory, many of us, we tend to be very good at remembering things we care deeply about, but not for things that we don't. And that can feel really vulnerable because it doesn't mean that you don't care about your friends, your loved ones. It's ultimately just we're processing the information differently and we need to have additional strategies, but also ways to make our working memory external to us to help us remember that key information at a later time. And then for prioritization, we can have differences in being able to tell what is important because for many of us, it can feel like if I don't see it, it's not happening and it doesn't matter. And if I can see it, it's crucial to deal with right now. And that can make for difficulties in being able to work effectively on things like complex projects. Okay, so we will go into strategies. So what do we do if we want to find balance? If you value novelty and familiarity, spontaneity and predictability, order and chaos, routines and flexibility, how do we find a way to navigate this? Okay, so this is a cue that I use that I coined with some of the work I do with clients where I refer to it as safe spontaneity. It's where we're looking to do something familiar without notice because sometimes the little ADHD bug gets in you and you want to be able to go out and just do something out of the blue, but we also don't want to get dysregulated. We don't want to throw off your week because you've overextended. For me, what this looks like is I can go to a Denny's anytime because the food is the same and it has been for my entire life and it will be for my entire life. I don't need to know the menu ahead of time because I know the menu intrinsically. The setup of the restaurant is the same no matter the location you go to. So if my friends want to do something with no notice, I can usually do something like a Denny's. This nurtures your ability to engage spontaneously with friends, family, etc. And it doesn't take as much of an emotional and sensory toll on your system. On the other side of this, how do we nurture novelty? So I look to novelty with predictability. If I want to go to that new restaurant with my friend, I need notice. I need to be able to process the menu ahead of time. I need to be able to give myself the space to maybe even look up the restaurant. What does it look like? Where am I parking? How am I getting there? And then what is the contingency plan if I get there and the thing that I feel okay eating is out of stock because I should still eat something, but I don't want to shut down in the restaurant and not be able to do that. And because it's scheduled ahead, we can reschedule if you're having a hard day or a hard week, and that is okay. But this is the idea that on this side, we're nurturing that need for the newness and giving our nervous system the support on the predictable side. We can also look for ways to create spaces that work with your brain instead of against your brain. There's a book that I have linked at the end that goes into this in more depth, but we're trying to find systems that are functional and accessible because I don't know about you, but I think many of us neurodivergent folks have spent way too much time and money trying to build the perfect organizational system and spent all of the time trying to get it exactly right. And then you have a low capacity day and you can't maintain it. So we're talking things that actually take into account your capacity. So for example, this could be things where we're taking away the friction involved in putting them away. So I lived with laundry in a basket on my floor for years until I switched to just not folding most things because they were wrinkly anyways, they were in the basket. So this way, I just have drawers where I toss the stuff in and it takes me 5 minutes and it feels a lot more accessible, but I can also chunk it for myself and do just the socks or just the shirts, and it's not a problem. But then when it comes to accessing it, it's still accessible compared to the hamper. Is it the perfect system? No. But was I using a perfect system? Absolutely not. We can also look for ways to help things stay in our working memory. So you may have seen online, there's a lot of folks that are starting to do things like putting the fruit and veggies in the door of their fridge so that you see them and you eat them. Things like sauce, you know that you want ranch. You will go to get the ranch. So if the ranch is inconvenient, that's fine. You're still probably going to get it. But if we don't see the apple and it goes bad, and now you're scared of going in your fruit and veggie drawer because there's mold in there, we've potentially disabled the whole fridge at that point, and that's not something that we can live with. We also want to think about how can we shift our expectations for each task based on what our body can do that day. Many of us also live with chronic pain and chronic illness. So for example, if bending down is not a consistently accessible thing, do we have the option to get a rolly stool? Can we get a little grabber claw thing? And can we have a basket that we plop on our lap to be able to hold many things so that we can pick up the stuff that's crucial in a room? Can we take steps that make it easier to be able to give things a home during our day instead of having to have this big cleanup at the end, like having a dedicated basket in the room that is for all the things that don't go in the room, but you don't really know where they need to go right now and we haven't processed it yet. We can habit stack, so taking things that we're likely to do that are accessible for us and pairing them up with something that is less likely to happen so that we take the momentum, because we get dopamine back when we finish a task. And dopamine is such a crucial motivator to be able to get rolling on something. So for myself, I might pair the dishwasher, that's an accessible enough task for me, with washing my coffee mugs, because I know that I'm going to need them. I will want to bring a drink to work. And it's going to be a problem if I don't have that the next day. So I stack those two together. I'm not trying to say put all of washing the dishes. That's too big of a task. But I can wash 4 mugs and that's fine. And then how do we reframe our relationship with tidying? Because for many of us, we have a trauma relationship around cleaning. Because for many of us, it might be that, let's say your special interest just needs a lot of space. So you don't have the ability to have a really minimalistic, quote unquote, tidy home, but that doesn't mean it's not functioning for you. If your space is functional, that is a tidy, healthy space. And on top of that, if cleaning is meant to serve our needs and to help us take care of ourselves, it should match what the need is. If you are in the middle of being sick and you cannot wash all your dishes, is it okay to rerun the dishwasher with mostly clean dishes, but the couple of things that you need? Is it okay to buy the paper plates? Because we're not going to save the rainforest if we're burnt out all of the time. And that's an important balance where we have to recognize that there's a difference between when we use disposable things just because we are not taking steps to create systems that support sustainability versus when we're recognizing that it's a legitimate disability accessibility tool for us. And then for this next one, this is one that both my spouse and I came up for the work that we do. My spouse is a personal trainer, I'm a therapist, and there's a lot of overlaps because we work with autistics and ADHDers. And realistically, when we're trying to get our brain into routines, we need support no matter what setting we're in. So the way that we work with this is we think about our capacity in terms of red, yellow, and green days. Red days are the days where we have the capacity to do survival things. If we get out of bed and we fed ourselves, that is a win. Yellow days is where we have the capacity to do the things that you need to do and a few wants as well. And then green days. It's where you have the capacity to do everything you need to and most of the things that you want to. For some of us, we might not have a lot of green days to start with. However, if we try to pretend that every yellow day is a green day, we're going to buy ourselves a bunch of red days because we can't just manifest capacity. We actually have a nervous system that needs time to rest and recharge. So if we can meet ourselves where our nervous system is, we can set ourselves up for a lot more success. So how do we put this in practice? We're talking about flexible goals with a variety of ways to complete the routines based on where you are that day. What this does is it tells the ADHD part of your brain that we still did the thing. We haven't lost the routine, we haven't lost the system. And for the autistic side of our brain, we've got that consistency and predictability. And we want to be realistic. It would be great to say that my yellow day means that I'm going to fold the laundry, clean the bathroom, and clean the kitchen. That is not a yellow day for me. It might be for you, and that's okay. But it should also shift not only with the person, but also where you are in your life. Did you just have a child? Did you start a new job? Are you in the process of moving apartments? Our expectations should follow our capacity where we are. An example of this, let's imagine if I'm trying to build more movement into my day. A red day That might look like doing 10 chair sit to stands. That is standing up from your chair. It's a modified squat. That is exercise and movement. It could look like walking up and down your stairs. It could look like doing a couple of small chores that help you maintain your function in your home. That ticks the box. I did movement. I nurtured myself today. Yellow days, maybe that looks like going for a walk around the block. Maybe that's cleaning your house for a bit longer. We also want to keep dopamine in mind here. Do the thing that you're excited to because the best routine is the one that you want to do. And then green days. It could look like going for a jog. It could look like doing dancing at home. It could look like planning a fun activity with your friend to go to Activate or something like that. But we're giving ourselves the space to recognize that all of these count as movement because it's not going to serve us if we look at the red day and say, I didn't do enough. Because you actually did. You survived the day and you nurtured your body. So we're looking at how do we meet ourselves where we are. And then for resources. Some really, really great self-directed resources I highly recommend. Unmasking Autism is a phenomenal book written by a trans and autistic author, and it gives a really thorough walkthrough of how do we find acceptance and understanding and self-love. And I would say it is actually quite strong for ADHDers and many other disabilities as well, because frankly, it's just a good guide to understanding your needs in a non-judgmental way. The Neurodivergent Friendly Workbook of DBT Skills, absolutely phenomenal. It's bright, it's colorful, and you can do one page at a time and never pick it up again, and you'll still have walked away with something useful for yourself. The author is non-binary and AuDHD. Neuroqueer Heresies by Dr. Nick Walker, neuroqueer author, so autistic and also queer. And this one I will say is the most academically written. However, if you like that kind of writing, I really like the academic flipping the middle finger to the systems that have oppressed us kind of approach that this book takes. And also educating you on how to advocate against and within those systems. And then How to Keep House While Drowning. Casey Davis is an author who is ADHD and also lives with depression. And she does a really great job of breaking down in super accessible steps how to approach cleaning. And I'm talking the chapters are 1 to 2 pages. The main point is bolded, and you could read just that if you needed to. And at the bottom of each chapter, there's a guide that says, if you have no capacity, skip to here. So highly, highly accessible if you're having a hard time taking care of yourself with your space. And then I'm sure many of us are familiar with these community supports, but I will list them anyways. ADHD Edmonton has an AuDHD support group. Highly, highly recommend checking it out because it is so valuable to have a space that accounts for all of our needs and that wraparound understanding. CADRA, or the Canadian ADHD Resource Alliance, has a ton of great information for practitioners as well. I highly recommend the trainings that they offer. They give really solid breakdowns. For autism specific, Autism Edmonton, as I'm sure you all know, is absolutely wonderful. They have support groups, they have really cool social activities, advocacy, all of those pieces. Center for Autism Services has a bunch of our skill building programs, again, advocacy pieces. And then Aid Canada, exceptional online resource. They have honestly an immense amount of books on autism. They have videos, they have educational content, extremely, extremely helpful. Do folks have questions?